Ladies and gentlemen, here to continue with the legislative breakfast is the Vice Chair of Government Relations for the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, Brad Krieger.
Anyway, I certainly hope that you enjoyed your breakfast. We now want to take a moment to recognize all the elected and cabinet officials that have joined us today. Would all of the elected and cabinet officials please stand, and we're going to go around with a microphone and give a brief, just brief introduction of yourself. And Drew Dugan will have one microphone, and Derek Sparks, they're both in the back of the room. So if those officials would please stand.
Come on. There's some back here. There we go, Michael. Senator Brooks.
And please keep standing, and they'll bring the mics around.
Cindy Bird, State Auditor.
Jason Dunnington, Representative, House District 88.
Michael Brooks, Senate District 44.
David Prater, Oklahoma County DA.
Chuck Hall, Senate District 20.
Carrie Bloomer, Oklahoma County Commissioner, District 1. Cindy Munson, House District 85.
Gary Mize, House District 31.
Nicole Miller, House District 82.
Larry McAtee, Oklahoma City Ward 3 Councilman.
Chris Kennedy, State House, South Oklahoma City.
Paul Rosino, Senate District 45.
Kelly Albright, House District 95.
Derek.
Carrie Hicks, Senate District 40.
Rhonda Baker, House District 60.
Stephanie Weiss, Senate District 22.
Good morning, Lewis Moore, House District 96.
Julia Kurt, Senate District 30.
Rick Warren, Oklahoma County Court Clerk.
Bob Anthony, Corporation Commissioner. There were no earthquakes yesterday.
Good morning, Mark Stone Cipher, Ward 8, Oklahoma City Council.
Tammy West, Representative, House District 84.
Marilyn Stark, House District 100.
Forrest Bennett, House District 92.
Okay. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to the city and as well as the state. And we do appreciate your service. 2018 was a monumental year of change for the Oklahoma political landscape. There's new faces and names in every level of government, and the state legislature is no exception. When 149 state senators and representatives convene next week for the first day of session, we will have the largest number of freshmen senators and representatives since statehood. And 103 of them, that's 70%, have 4 years or less experience. So combined with the new leadership of Governor Kevin Stitt and Lieutenant Governor Matt Pinnell, the 2019 legislative session has the potential for a fresh start. We've certainly made progress in the past several years on some of the most important issues to business, including last year's teacher pay raise, the ongoing protection of effective economic development incentives, and continuing criminal justice reform statewide. But there's still a lot more to do. In particular, we want to see additional efforts to reduce the number of incarcerated individuals in Oklahoma. Right now, and you hear it repeatedly through the news media, Oklahoma locks up more offenders per capita than any state in the country, and that is not fiscally sustainable. Money we spend on building prisons is money that we can't spend on education, transportation, or health care. And we believe that this year, elected officials have an opportunity to change the tide by continuing a smart and safe approach to criminal justice reform. And I want to take a moment to thank Clay Bennett. Clay was at the forefront of this initiative about criminal justice reform and has absolutely been the leader there. And so thanks to Clay for all that he does. Besides what he does, of course, with the Thunder. So we also know that strategic increases to education must be a priority. This is a nationwide teacher shortage, and Oklahoma must think long-term about attracting teachers to the industry. An investment in our education system today is an investment in workforce of tomorrow. And that is a very, very competitive environment. Everybody's looking for that. So we must make that a priority to continue to see growth in our state's most important economic sectors. Finally, while the Chamber is fully supportive of the Second Amendment and the responsible expansion of gun owner rights, we believe that it must be balanced with the rights of business owners, hospitals, educational institutions, event hosts, to prohibit guns when necessary. The Chamber will continue to lead more than 50 organizations as part of Oklahoma's business and property owners' rights to oppose gun legislation that goes beyond reasonable expansion. While we can't predict what will be acted upon at the state capitol, one constant is the Chamber's commitment to pursuing growth and forward momentum for our state from a business-centric standpoint. And I believe that it is a goal that we share with all of our elected and appointed officials in this room. At your seats, you'll find the 2019 Public Policy Guide, the Chamber's guidebook for the business legislation that we'll pursue this year. I want to encourage you to flip through the guide, get a feel for the issues, and most importantly, use the contact information in the guide to reach out to your elected officials on topics that will impact your business community. The only way we move this state forward is by working together. And fortunately for us, that's something that Oklahomans do. And one of the things that we've seen in the last few years, there's no question, the people in this room have been very active. You see people at 23rd and Lincoln when they need to be there. And so it is a very, very collaborative effort. If you want to deepen, and for those that are on the Chamber, you've heard this before, I get to talk about PAC. But for those of you who want to deepen your engagement with the advocacy efforts, please consider making a donation to the Greater Oklahoma City Political Action Committee. Since it was founded in 2010, we've raised $465,000 to help pro-business candidates throughout the state. In most of the recent election cycle, we made 100 contributions totaling $130,000. Of those 100 contributions, 83 were made to successful candidates. These contributions go to both sides of the aisle. It is looking at people's ability to be pro-business in this environment. Those 83 people are already we already have a working relationship with. In the world of advocacy, relationships do matter. Our PAC will continue to engage in the upcoming election cycle and build relationships with pro-business candidates throughout the state. If you're interested in being part of this effort, fill out the PAC donation card that is in your information on the deck. Now let's hear from our legislative leadership on their insights as we head into session, which seems like we've been in session for 2 straight years, but anyway, it's going to start again next week. So with that, if the legislative leaders would come up to the podium. Help me welcome them as they're walking up here. And I will start to my left, your right. Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat was elected in 2011 as a state senator from District 47. In 2018, Senator Treat was elected by his colleagues in the Senate Republican caucus to serve as the Senate Pro Tem. To his right, Senate Democratic leader Kay Floyd was elected in 2012, where she focused on improving education system and working for Oklahoma's women and children. She was elected to the state Senate in 2014. In 2018, she was elected Senate Democratic leader. To my right, House Majority Floor Leader John ECHOLS was elected in 2012 to represent House District 90. He was appointed to serve as Assistant Majority Whip and was the only freshman to serve in such a House leadership position. He's currently the House Majority Floor Leader. House Democratic Minority Leader Emily Virgin was elected the Oklahoma House of Representatives in November of 2010. She serves on the Judiciary, Higher Education, Public Safety, and Appropriations and Budget Committees. She currently is the House Minority Leader. Let's give our panel a hand. So let's go ahead and get started. Panel members will respond to questions in 2 minutes or less, and they've got a clock down here to look. And if they're not paying attention to the clock, Mark, I'm sure, will get their attention. The panelists will respond to questions in the name order that they were introduced. For each subsequent question, the next panel member in the rotation will have the opportunity to answer first. The timer in front of the panel will count down 2 minutes and all that. And so please be respectful of the time of each other. So with that, we will start with Senator Treat. Many in the business community, including our chamber, oppose State Question 788, medical marijuana. And I think, we looked at it from the standpoint that it went much further than medical marijuana. However, now that the people have spoken, what sort of legislation do you expect in this area, and will protecting an employer's ability to enforce and maintain a drug-free workplace be a priority?
Thanks, Brad. Thanks to the Oklahoma City Chamber for having us. I always look forward to this opportunity. I hear my voice reverberating. This is awesome. But the marijuana issue is something that we have dealt with over the entire interim. Speaker McCall and myself appointed a bipartisan, bicameral task force to look at this. They came up with some recommendations that they recommended to the Department of Health implement some rules on testing and labeling. Unfortunately, in the opinion of the Attorney General and the Council at Department of Health, they were not able to institute those without legislative approval. So I think early on what you'll see us do, hopefully, is really address the testing and labeling, the recommendations that came out of that task force. It's extremely important that the will of the people be implemented, but it's equally important that public safety is protected and public health is protected. So testing and labeling is a true public safety issue that we've got to address early on. There are many other issues that we have to deal with that were not anticipated in the drafting of the initiative petition. And I do need to remind people it was an initiative petition. A lot of times I get the question, why did you draft it so poorly? We had nothing to do with drafting it. But we are now trying to implement it. And you've got to look at bankruptcy law. You've got to look at employment safety. We're going to work close with the Chamber to try to make sure that we ensure workplace safety. Senator Greg McCourtney from Ada is the point person in the Oklahoma State Senate that I appointed. He's become an expert on it, and he is working very closely with Leader ECHOLS as we move forward to this session. I think you'll see us be very diligent, very methodical, but also not waste any time in getting good policy implemented.
Thank you. Senator Floyd.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you to the Chamber for hosting us today. I always enjoy these breakfasts. Senator Michael Brooks was the Senate Democrat on the working group, and he did a great job on that. We have to remember first and foremost that while the petition was not perfectly drafted, it is at this point the law of the land, and it is our responsibility as legislators to make sure that it's implemented properly. As Senator Treat mentioned, Attorney General Mike Hunter actually has given us some guidance in that we know that our scope is limited to the language of the actual petition. So we must make sure that everything legislatively that we do is within those parameters. That being said, we need to be able to make sure employees are protected. However, there has to be a balance with the business community. Employers have a responsibility for safe workplaces, and they have a liability situation also. My caucus believes that we will be able to thread the needle and balance that out with legislation that will benefit both the employees, protect employees while protecting the employers.
Okay, thank you. Representative Echols.
Well, I want to say thank you as well to the Chamber for letting us have this event. I look forward to it every year. This is obviously my first time to get to speak at it, but it's a great honor to appear in front of you and such a great group. As to 788, I was appointed as the House Chairman of the Bipartisan Bicameral Committee, commonly called the Joint Committee, but we had meetings. Wherever Chad Alexander is, he should be happy. He's been trying to get me to say that on the radio for 6 months, and I won't do it. But if you look at, I'm going to answer very, very briefly that question on 788, but also I think that committee shows that we've turned a corner in the legislative process. Remember, this is a bicameral, bipartisan committee. House, Senate, Democrats, Republicans came together every Wednesday, did serious work, and came up with unanimous recommendations for testing and labeling. I think that is a sign of things to come. The level at which we are able to work together, we're going to have disagreements, but that's one of the ways that we are continuing to work together. As part of those recommendations, as the Pro Tem has already talked about labeling and testing, I literally spent yesterday going over the rest of the recommendations. There are protections in there for businesses that give them some, how do you handle work comp claims? What protections do you have where you need a drug-free environment that are still within the will of the people? And that's the direction I think this legislature is going to go. I think we're going to add clarity to that, and I think we're going to continue to do that in a manner that does protect businesses. We've been working very closely with the Oklahoma City Chamber. We've accepted the language that they wanted to put in to protect businesses, working very closely with the State Chamber, accepted some of their language that complies with what the people have voted for, because at the end of the day, that is our job in a representative democracy, but also protects businesses and protects those that are going to be using new medical marijuana as we roll this out in the state and do what the citizens have told us to do in a bipartisan, bicameral manner.
Representative Virgin.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. It's wonderful to see a full room and to see a lot of friends and esteemed colleagues in the audience. There's not a whole lot left to say on this topic, but I will note my caucus wanted to address this in a special legislative session. We felt that it was important to address the many issues surrounding the medical marijuana question as quickly as possible. That didn't happen, but I think that means that my caucus will be on board with addressing these issues as quickly as possible during the legislative session, because we know that there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this issue, and the business community is not immune from that. Oklahoma is still an at-will employment state, so I think that protecting employees, of course, is important, but protecting your right as businesses to make sure that you don't have employees who are impaired on the job, especially in safety-sensitive industries, is very important to us as well. So as my fellow panelists said, we have to respect the will of the people. That has been made abundantly clear to us over the past few months. I know Leader Echols has felt that more than anyone probably. And isn't it funny that we can use, I don't know, 10 syllables to say joint?
That's right.
That's what happens when lawyers and politicians come up with names of things. But so I'm looking forward to addressing this in a bipartisan manner, and I'm happy to hear that everyone seems to agree that we can find a balance between the will of the people and making sure that we have safe, drug-free workplaces.
And I might just say anecdotally, the banking industry, I mean, from a federal standpoint, it's still against the law. So from the banking industry standpoint, arguably, we can't take deposits of that. And I think a lot of us have spent money trying to figure out how do we get around that. So, but anyway, so there's a lot of things to deal with, and I do like the fact that it's the joint committee. Yeah. Okay. As mentioned earlier, Oklahoma continues to lead the country in incarceration. However, a number of bills have been filed that will, as a package, stop all projected prison growth in the state by focusing solely on reforms involving non-violent offenders. Are you supportive of the meaningful criminal justice reform, and do you see any roadblocks in getting those bills passed? And we'll start with Senator Floyd.
Thank you, Brad. My caucus is very strongly in support of criminal justice reform. We have been for many years now, even before it was a priority for the chamber. Senator George Young, who just met us, he came over from the House, has been active in his community and as a representative and now senator in criminal justice reform, not just in Oklahoma City but throughout the state. My colleague, Senator Treat, has in the last two sessions taken the lead on criminal justice reform in the Senate, and quite frankly, without his leadership, we probably wouldn't be as far along as we are right now. Our caucus position is that criminal justice reform is absolutely necessary. The incarceration rates are not just abysmal, they're embarrassing. To a certain extent, I think it hurts business as it hurts our reputation nationwide. But most importantly, for me, I believe that we cannot address criminal justice reform in Oklahoma without also making part of the discussion about how funding for criminal fees and assessments is basically how the courts are funded. We have got to get away from funding courts in that manner. As long as we fund that way, then we will be hampered in our criminal justice reform. I have discussed this with the Appropriations Chair, Senator Thompson. He's very receptive to listening to ways to get away from that sort of funding mechanism for the courts. He hasn't made any promises if he's here, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be looked at, and hopefully our caucus will be able to take the lead on that.
Thank you. Representative Echols.
Thank you. So we need to start off when we talk with criminal justice reform with just a baseline. Being number one on planet Earth in incarceration is not acceptable. We just have to accept that as a baseline. It is both a humanitarian issue and it's an economic issue. We can't afford the trajectory at which we are growing our incarceration rate. So when you accept that as the baseline, we know now, one of the things I like about Governor Stitt saying we want to be a top 10 state, he's committed to measurables. That's one of our measurables we have to find a way to reduce. I have filed several bills this year, total of 3 criminal justice reform bills. But when we're looking at criminal justice reform, we need to do a holistic approach. You know, we have in our audience today our district attorney, David Prater. I got to tell you, if every district attorney was David Prater, we wouldn't have this issue. We're blessed to have an incredible district attorney. They need to be at the table when we have these conversations. We have to do this in a way that lowers the incarceration rate for nonviolent offenders, but still protects my constituents who live on Northwest 16th and Rockwell. So with that being said, I've filed very aggressive criminal justice reform, giving juries more authority to give probation, looking at some retroactivity of State Question 780. How can we deal with what the voters have already told us to do? We can do those things in a way that still protects public safety and brings all people to the table. But again, we can argue over the policy and we can argue over how to get there. If we all start from this baseline, number one in incarceration on planet Earth is not acceptable, then we're going to have significant moves in criminal justice reform. And I think that's what's going to happen next year, and I think this chamber is a large part of helping it happen.
Thank you. Representative Virgin.
Well, I want to thank the Chamber for being leaders on this issue for several years now. And it's music to my ears to hear that everyone seems to be in agreement that we have a problem. Now, the challenge is how do we fix it? And I think that we are in substantial agreement on how we fix it. Retroactivity of State Question 780 is going to play a big part in that, I think, this year, because when we talk about reforms that will affect future incarcerated individuals or future people who interact with the criminal justice system, that's great. But we have to do something about overcrowded prisons currently. We have to do something about the current prison population. And so Leader Echols and Representative Dunnington, their legislation is going to be a very big part of that. But my caucus also believes that we can't just do this in a vacuum. We have to talk about reentry and rehabilitation. We have to talk about mental health funding. We have to talk about why people are ending up in the criminal justice system as a safety net, essentially, for substance abuse and mental health disorders. I think District Attorney Prater would tell you the Oklahoma County Prison or the Oklahoma County Jail is filled with people who have untreated mental illnesses. And so when we talk about reducing our future population, we have to make sure that we're funding diversionary programs, make sure that we're not sending people to prison because their probation has been revoked. That's 30% of our current prison population is there because their probation has been revoked. And so that's an important conversation to have, but I look forward to having that conversation and finally making some significant progress on this issue this session.
Okay, thank you. Senator Tree.
Thank you, Brad. I'll turn my mic on. Thank you, Brad. This is an extremely important topic. I do thank the Chamber for leading the discussion over the last couple of years, both the city and the state chamber, both left-leaning think tanks and right-leaning think tanks. We all seem to be in a kind of a sweet spot where we can actually make some progress. I was on the other side of this issue when I was younger. You know, truth in sentencing and those type of things, mandatory minimum were the sweep in the nation, and we were having crime waves. But when you look at the growth of the prison population, those type of things have really exacerbated our problem. We used to be able to say, thank God for Louisiana, because their rates were higher than ours, but we surpassed them this year, and that's unacceptable. We've got to balance public safety, make sure that the district attorney's voice is at the table, as Leader Echols and others have alluded to. But we also don't need to be leading from a position of fear. There's always the fear of, if we do this, you're going to have a Willie Horton type situation from the early 90s. I mean, if you go back in the political history, if you balance public safety, we can do this much smarter. We've been able to, over the last 4 or 5 years, bend the trajectory. So the trajectory of prison population was almost completely upward. It's still growing, but it's growing at a slower rate. We must do things to try to bend that trajectory down where we can get some numbers down. And I think we can do so balancing public safety, not making any of our neighborhoods less safe, but also realizing that these people not being in prison, getting the substance abuse treatment they need or the mental health treatment that they may need, will make society much better. It will produce tax-paying citizens, but it will also produce families that don't have kids in Department of Human Services. It will produce kids who don't have the broken families that we've seen that contribute to cyclical imprisonment. So I'm excited to work with my colleagues on that this year.
Thank you. And we'll start with Representative ECHOLS this time. Okay, this year there's more than 40 gun bills seeking expansion of gun rights. Last year there were in excess of 80 that we had to deal with. Our chamber leads the Oklahomans for Business Property Owners Rights Coalition, which was formed to protect the rights of businesses, property owners, and event hosts in the state, and continues to consider legislation that could infringe on those rights. What types of gun legislation do you expect to pass this year, and are you committed to protecting the rights of businesses and event hosts against harmful legislation in this area?
Thank you for that question. I'm glad for the way you asked the question. I've got my local college in my district, OCCC, in the back, and my father actually sitting down there as one of the Board of Regents. I'm an A-plus NRA-rated legislator that has consistently voted against guns on campus and still maintains an A-plus rating with the NRA. Strongly support the Second Amendment. I will always strongly support the Second Amendment. But you can balance those rights with the rights of businesses, of civic centers, of college campuses to control who carries on those campuses. I strongly, after being on the doors in Oklahoma, while I believe the citizens of the state of Oklahoma rewarded those who they believed as part of the solution and punished those as they believe as part of the problem, to think that Oklahomans are not pro-Second Amendment is, well, that's just not true. And what I love about the Chamber's position is they don't take that position. They take a very pro-Second Amendment position, but saying we have to juxtapose that with the rights of the individuals to determine who carries and where they can carry. I think you'll see legislation passed this year regarding who can carry, regarding whether or not you can carry in your car, maybe even whether or not you need a permit to carry. But I think when you look at that legislation that's been filed through the work through organizations like the Chamber, you're going to see additional protections placed into that legislation that will protect businesses, will protect civic organizations, will continue with our system. And by the way, we do have guns on campus. It's just President Jerry Stewart, for example, at OCCC, gets to determine who is allowed those. And by the way, that system is working. That system has worked well. When we need someone there, the presidents can make that determination. President Gallagher at OU can do that too. Those systems work well. I think you can see enhanced protections there. You can juxtapose private property rights, which Oklahomans hold dear, and Second Amendment rights, which Oklahomans also hold dear.
Thank you. Representative Virgin.
Well, thank you. And again, on this issue, the Oklahoma City Chamber has been very helpful in making sure that dangerous and unnecessary legislation hasn't made it through the legislature. As Leader Echols said, no one can ever accuse Oklahoma of being anti-Second Amendment. I think we're pretty strong on that issue. But there comes a time when we're going too far. And things like constitutional carry, permitless carry, whatever you want to call it, it's too far. Guns on college campuses are too far. When we tell businesses that they don't have the right to prevent guns on their property, that's too far. Individuals have rights and businesses have rights, and we have to make sure that we protect both of those. But simply having more places and more people without permits to carry guns is not the direction that we need to be going in. And so I know that this is another issue that the Chamber is concerned about affecting our national image. things like a 4-day school week, things like criminal justice reform affecting our national image. This is one of those issues that absolutely affects our national image. And so I appreciate the concern and the strong leadership on this issue, but it's unfortunate that we have to have this conversation each and every year. Legislators need to know and need to see that this is simply unnecessary. And so my caucus will be committed to protecting the status quo, to protecting your right to make sure that people can't carry if you don't want them to on your private property. So again, thanks for your leadership. We'll look forward to working with you on it.
Okay. Senator Tree.
Thank you. The U.S. Constitution is quite strong and quite clear on the Second Amendment, but it's also quite clear and quite strong on private property rights. They are not mutually exclusive. You can have both a robust recognition of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, and you can have a robust protection of private property rights. And I think striking that balance this legislative session is of paramount importance. If you want to keep things like the NCAA tournament, the NBA, other events coming to Oklahoma City, we've got to recognize that we've got to strike that balance legislatively. We can't go too far one way or another. But you will see me and my caucus continue to strongly promote people's right to keep and bear arms and not infringe on that right. But you will also see us just as zealously protect private business owners, private landowners, event planners, those type of people, to make sure that we don't compromise your ability to bring revenue to Oklahoma, to be able to protect your own private property rights and make the rules and decisions that are best for whatever event or whatever business you have. So they are not mutually exclusive. We can have a balance in Oklahoma, and we will have a balance.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Floyd.
Thank you, Brad. I too want to thank the Chamber, the City and the State Chamber for their support of common sense gun legislation. I don't think anyone who knows me could argue that I'm not a big fan of the Constitution. I bring it up pretty much every legislative session, all day, every day, because I really find the importance of the Constitution and upholding the Constitution one of our primary duties. That being said, I don't find anything in the Constitution that says you can't be pro-business and be pro-gun. Our caucus is going to support the Second Amendment. They always have. However, when we have extreme legislation that is dangerous to the community, it's dangerous to the people, it's dangerous to business owners, it's dangerous to our reputation, we are going to oppose that. That's it.
Thank you. I mean, no question it's an emotional issue and high on everybody's list. Okay, we'll start with Representative Virgin. With regard to increased classroom funding for common education, do you believe it should be tied to a strategic plan that links increased funding to improve classroom performance?
Thanks for that question, and I think classroom funding will be a very big topic this session. My caucus sees what we did last session in House Bill 1010. We see that as just the first step in getting us back to where we need to be in terms of education funding and teacher pay. Excuse me. So we will be very strong in our support for increased classroom funding, and we'll be very strong in our support for teacher pay increases, because we know that those things are the strategic plan to make sure that we have the outcomes that we need in education. Right now, classroom environments simply aren't conducive to learning. They're not conducive to effective teaching. When you have 32 third graders in a class, Lord, I wouldn't want to be in that room. But that is not something that is conducive to learning or teaching. And so when we talk about outcomes, when we get the funding piece right, the outcomes will be there. And so if we want to put something about outcomes in legislation, that's fine with me. But I think it's important to note that right now, our teachers, our administrators, our parents, and students are doing an incredible job when they haven't been funded appropriately in at least 10 years. And so my caucus will be focused primarily on getting the funding portion right, getting our per pupil expenditure where it needs to be, at least up to what other states around us are spending on their children. Our children are worth exactly, if not more, than what children in surrounding states are worth, and we need to invest in them. And so when we talk about things like criminal justice reform, education is a key part of that, because we know that someone with an education is much less likely to end up in the criminal justice system. And so we see it as a full circle, and we see it as an issue that we've neglected for way too long, and hope to address this session.
Thank you. Senator Treat.
Short answer is yes. I'll give you a little bit more elaboration on it. Our caucus came out with our agenda 2 days ago, and one of the parts of the agenda on the education was making sure that we protect the investment that we've made in education, the historic investment last year, but let's not just make it historic. Let's make sure we show our commitment into the future. We're absolutely committed to the teacher pay raise and continuing to try to find resources for education. Resources alone isn't enough. You have to have measurables. You have to have outcomes. The student needs to be the center of all education policy. How do we get that student prepared for the future, prepared for either a career tech education, a higher education, for the workforce? And if we don't have outcome-based measurements, we don't know if our money's being well spent or not. Obviously, teachers deserve more money. Obviously, we need more money into the classroom. But just to throw money at something without having any measurables would be a mistake in my mind. We've got to make sure they're fair measurables, though. One of the things that I talk to teachers in the classroom all the time is they're very worried about a single test deciding income or some kind of merit pay when they may get students who are further behind in their class at first. So making sure that the assessments are fair, that educators have input into the outcomes, that we don't just do it at 23rd and Lincoln without any input from the experts who are actually educating our children, who are the administrators, and those type of people would be an equal mistake. But the Oklahoma Senate Republican Caucus absolutely committed to the investment we've made in education. Education is absolutely the number one priority. We will continue to make it that. But having outcome measurements is something that we'd be very open to.
Thanks for not taking that as a yes or no. I should have said explain. Senator Floyd.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, last session was a very good start. It was a very good start for teachers and for educators and for the state, but mostly for the children. But it was just that. It was just a start. We need to continue to support education, and that means not just financially, but class sizes, staff, support staff, materials, books. All those things are very important. We need to continue with, yes, a strategic plan. A member of our caucus, Senator Sparks, last year and the year before, put forth strategic planning for education. His suggestion was that we use the same sort of planning that we use at ODOT, the 8-year plan. If we can do it for roads and bridges, we can certainly do it for our students and our teachers. A strategic plan would be very beneficial to the education system in Oklahoma. But we have to remember, as we did have a good start, but it was just a start. We are still at funding levels that we were at 10 years ago. And it's not just Common Ed, it's higher ed also. We've got to get back to 5-day school weeks. We've got to get back to class sizes that are manageable. We've got to get teachers back into the state and stop the bleeding of teachers leaving the state. We've got to get our certified teacher numbers down. We're almost at 3,000 certified teachers, emergency certified teachers in the state right now. We've got to support education with a strategic plan. Yes, we will look at tying it to outcomes. We have a brand new educator on our caucus, Carrie Hicks, along with J.J. Dossett and Senator Bourne. So our caucus is very much committed to moving forward with a strategic plan for education in Oklahoma.
Thank you. All right, we'll start again with Senator Treat this time. Oh.
I kind of want to talk about the education issue.
Oh, yeah.
I do appreciate that. The House Republican Caucus could echo a lot of what's been said. Education is the primary issue. It's the top issue. As the House of Representatives, we're up every 2 years. Out of 101 members, we had 76 primary elections or general elections. We've been on the doorstep. We can tell you education is the number one issue. When you ask the question, my pastor used to teach a great sermon that said, if you'll decide the big decisions, the small decisions will follow. The big decision in education is, what's education about? Education at the end of the day is about the children. It's not necessarily even about the schools. It's not about the teachers. It is about the children. When we decide that that's what it's about, then you have to continue that investment. You don't have any other option. You have to continue to invest to higher levels. But you also have to ask, what are new, innovative ways we make sure that investment makes it to the child level and makes a difference in that child's life? When Pro Tem Treat and I were talking in Putnam City recently to a group of students at a legislative panel, we had a student stand up, a senior in high school stand up and say, why don't you allow innovative ideas like block scheduling? Why do I have to be there, and why can't I go to my local VOTEC, my local community college, my local two-year college during this school year? Why don't you allow these things? This is a high school student. Yes, we have to continue the teacher pay raise. Boy, if the House Republican Caucus stands for anything, it's continued teacher pay raise. We've stood for that for 2 years, as I know colleagues on this table have. But we are going to continue that investment that reaches down to hardcore educational outcomes that are measurable and deliverable, because it's about the children. We now have the opportunity in education policy to talk about things we haven't been able to talk about in the past. Do we need to rework the formula? Is it working? Is it getting where it needs to go? Is it funding schools properly? Those decisions that haven't been on the table for 6 years now are back on, because we're looking at education holistically and how do we make a difference in these children's lives. And I think it's going to be a good session for that.
I apologize if you thought that was a slight. It was merely a test.
I have way thicker skin than that, I promise.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. We'll start with you, Senator Treat. With a new governor and 60 new legislators, there's a lot of excitement and certainly a lot of uncertainty going into the legislative session. Government reform is a topic that's receiving lots of attention. What specific types of reform would you support and what would you oppose? Explain.
Thank you. You didn't want me to just list a laundry list, bullet point? Okay. The Oklahoma Senate Republican Caucus again came out with the agenda. 4 points. Government accountability was very prominent in that. Government accountability to us means allowing the governor to appoint more positions, have more control over hiring and firing of agency heads. On behalf of my caucus, I've filed 5 bills to that end of the top 5 appropriated agencies, in line with what Governor Stitt has asked for, but it's also in line with what we've been trying to do for a few years in the state Senate. So it's extremely important when you hire or elect a governor that you give them the ability to be successful. And when you hamper them and tie their hands behind their back and allow all decisions to be made by boards and commissions, that really hampers their ability to be effective. It also hampers your ability to hold that governor accountable, because they can easily say, well, I don't really have control over that agency. So we're going to do that. We also want to have government reform as far as budget transparency and creating a legislative budget office to be able to have real numbers, to be able to look at programs and evaluate them and see if they're hitting the target that we've set for them. One of the goals of having a legislative budget office is when we walk into the budget negotiations, we're not all on different pages as far as what the numbers are. That's one part. Equally, if not more important part of having a legislative office, fiscal transparency as I've deemed it, is to be able to make sure that when we pass a program, we're not dependent on these agency heads to tell if it's effective, or the people who have a vested interest in it coming and saying it's successful or not. We can have objective data. Government accountability is extremely important, given appointment authority and having much more budget transparency. As I think the 2 things you'll see us push hardest on this year.
Thank you. Senator Floyd.
Thank you, Brad. Well, 60 new members is going to be an opportunity and also a challenge, I think. The opportunity is we've got people coming in with 60 new people coming in with new ideas, new experiences. The challenge is going to be we've lost a lot of members with institutional memory and perspective that few of us are going to have. So it is going to be a challenge, but an opportunity. Our caucus believes in transparency and accountability, especially as it relates to the budget. We've got to have agencies justify their appropriation request. We need to know exactly what it is that they're asking for, what they're going to do with the budget and the appropriations that they're given, how are they going to use it, and are they going to be accountable, not just to the legislature, but accountable to the people of the state of Oklahoma. Regarding reforms, We believe that with health outcomes in a state at one of the lowest levels, we are nationwide, we have the highest levels in obesity, in diabetes, and mental health problems, that we have to look at expanding Medicaid in the state of Oklahoma and get our health care outcomes up. We've seen state after state after state take the money that Oklahomans are sending to the federal government for taxes and using that to expand Medicaid while our health outcomes continue to drop. We believe that reform for Medicaid expansion is the way to go.
Thank you. Representative Echols.
Thank you for that. You know, in the House of Representatives, out of 101 members, there's going to be 47 freshmen. As floor leader, I'm keenly aware of that number as I create committees with 47 new faces. Anyone that tells you exactly how these votes are going to go, at least in the House, is a little unclear with that many new faces. Now, that being said, those 47 new freshmen went into an Oklahoma governmental system that is absolutely broken. The way that we do government in the state of Oklahoma has to be reimagined. We were talking about this before the session. You think when you elect a governor, you've elected executive, and no, you have not. Imagine President Trump governing with President Obama's executive team, or imagine President Obama governing with George W. Bush's executive team. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. Well, that's how we do it in Oklahoma. Imagine a legislature that has 3 fiscal staff in the House of Representatives trying to look over a $7 billion appropriatable budget and close to a $21 billion total budget. Well, that's how we do it in Oklahoma. That has to change. What we have done, and working very closely with the Senate and the governor, we are looking at a way where we balance the power, where we don't give too much power to the executive, but we give them the ability to hold agency heads accountable and to have that ability to run your government in an efficient manner where your vote matters. We've looked at creating an Office of Accountability. The Speaker has a bill, the Pro Tem has a bill, I had a bill. We are going to create that Office of Accountability that has the ability to make sure your tax dollars are well spent. All of you are in business. The first thing you do when you have a problem, do you throw more money at it? No, you look at your structure, and you want to know, is there structural issues? We have structural deficiencies in the state of Oklahoma, but we can fix those by giving more authority to the executive to do their job that you voted them in to do, and by giving the legislature the horsepower to hold your state dollars and your tax dollars accountable. And I believe we're going to accomplish that next year, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, the word reform seems to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I think the basic definition is change. So do I support changing the way that we do things? Absolutely. But I think the biggest change that we have to make is properly funding core services in Oklahoma. We haven't funded things like education, higher education, mental health, corrections. We haven't funded any of those things appropriately in 10 years. We've been starving agencies. Do you starve someone and then expect them to run a marathon? No. You feed that person, you invest in them. We have to invest in these agencies and give them the resources that they need so that they can do the job that we expect them to do. Criminal justice reform is key to that, obviously. But when we talk about the word reform, it's not a magic fix. Like we use this word reform and it's going to solve everything. No, it's not. I mean, creating new offices or new agencies, sure, that's great. But if you don't invest in the agencies and the departments and the state employees that we expect to do some very important jobs and to deliver some very important services, if you don't invest in them, then things aren't going to change. Now, Senator Floyd talked a lot about accepting our federal money, bringing our federal dollars home, and that is going to be a very important reform, I think, to my caucus. When we talk about health outcomes, when we talk about rural hospitals closing, we have to change the way that we do things in healthcare. It is past time to bring our federal tax dollars home to ensure more Oklahomans and ensure that more Oklahomans have access to the healthcare that they desperately need.
Thank you. With that, we're going to give each of the panelists 2 minutes to kind of wrap up their thoughts, et cetera, and we'll start with Senator Floyd.
Well, again, I appreciate the panel. Appreciate Brad. Thank you for introducing us, and the Chamber for hosting this. I think we've heard some great ideas. I think everyone does want to move forward with the state with reforms. We've got a lot of things on our plate this session. We need to continue to work on education. I think everyone has acknowledged that we have issues with criminal justice reform, and we're going to continue to work on those. Healthcare and health outcomes in Oklahoma need work, but I'm excited to have a new legislature for the reasons that I mentioned earlier: new ideas, new perspective, new energy, new excitement, and I think that moving forward we are going to see maybe we can make the top 10.
Thank you. Representative Echols.
Well, first I want to say thank you for coming here. There's many places you could have been this morning, and you decided to come here. I want to say thank you for what you do for this city that I love. I was born and raised in Oklahoma City. That's where we chose to spend our life and to raise our family. We're actually members in my business of the Oklahoma City Chamber, and thank you for all of that. What I hope you're left with today after hearing this is a new sense of hope. I will tell you, we are getting along in a manner that I really haven't seen since I've been up here, from both the executive, from the House and the Senate, from the minority and the majority party. Not that there's not going to be policy differences, not there's not going to be strong policy differences, but there's a new acceptance that we all wear the same jersey, and that's the jersey of an Oklahoman. And I believe we are going to continue to move the state forward, both in economic policy. We're going to continue the pro-jobs, pro-growth, pro-efficiency, pro-smaller government that we've brought to you as the Republican Party. There's a renewed sense of a desire to invest in education, to continue with what we did last year. You've heard bipartisan efforts for criminal justice reform. And I hope by the time we're done with these next 2 years, that these freshmen are going to inherit a better functioning, a better system of state government than what we inherited when we came in. And if we can fix those structural deficiencies, while at the same time reinvesting in the state of Oklahoma, continuing our pro-economic growth policies, continuing to invest in infrastructure, I believe Oklahoma's turnaround really is here. And it has started, and that's what we're doing. And we are going to continue that. We're going to work closely with Governor Stitt as we find those measurables. And I hope you left here with some excitement, with some desire to know our best days really are still in front of us, both for the city, which I live in and I love, and for this state. And I hope you see that, and I hope you'll continue this energy with us as we move forward with the same jersey, not Republican, not Democrat, not House, not Senate, but Oklahoman.
Representative Virgin.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here today, and thanks again to the Chamber for taking some bold stances on issues that would be easy to just not take a position on. So we appreciate that. We appreciate you taking on some tough issues like criminal justice reform and making sure that private property rights are protected from unnecessary legislation that would bring more guns to your private property. My caucus will be primarily focused on a few things this session, and we see some real opportunities: education, healthcare, criminal justice reform. But it's important that you push us to not be done with the revenue conversation. I've heard from many people who were in the legislature in good times, and they had budget surpluses, and I think it's going to be probably even tougher to dole out some extra money than it is to cut agencies. Because everyone, I think Common Education can make a case for every single dollar of our budget surplus. So it's going to be a tough year when it comes to the budget, just like it has been in the past few years. So we can't be done with the revenue conversation. We can't go back to the time where we think that cutting the income tax is the way to go. We have to continue investing in agencies, and the outcomes will come. The outcomes will happen. Our health outcomes will increase. Our education outcomes will be much better as long as we continue to invest just like we started last session.
Thank you. Senator Trade.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to be before you all. If you look at the platform, You've got the pro tem of the Senate, the Democrat leader of the Senate, the floor leader of the House, all residing in Oklahoma City. I don't know the last time that has happened. But we have to balance statewide needs. We all represent diverse caucuses as far as backgrounds, where they live, rural, urban, all of that. I think you'll see up here we had a bit of a mutual admiration society. We weren't all that far apart. Senator Floyd, it's an honor to work with you. Senator Sparks and I had a really good working relationship before, and you and I did as well. I'm excited what we can do. We have to lock arms with the House, with our Democrat counterparts, to restore trust in the legislative process. We're not immune to the fact that people don't trust the legislature. We have to show that the people can trust the people they put in office. So we're going to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're going to be very transparent with what we do. And just as a close, because I've told people in my caucus I'm going to hammer it home every time I get a chance, we have a 4-point agenda. It's real easy. Government accountability, giving the governor more appointing authority. Legislative transparency, creating an office of legislative transparency, making sure the numbers are real. Criminal justice reform, investing in diversionary programs. And education investment, making sure that we protect the investment we made, make strides in that, but also restore the 5-day school week to make sure that we in Oklahoma don't have a reputation across the country when we're trying to recruit businesses, when we're trying to make sure that families have kids that are well educated. We will try to restore the 5-day school week this year. 4-point agenda. Love to have your feedback on it after the breakfast. Thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you. In behalf of the chamber and this whole group, we want to thank the panelists for their insight, their passion, and their service. We wish you all the best during this next legislative session. So let's give the panelists a round of applause. And again, we want to thank all of our sponsors for making today's dialogue possible. So applause for them too. And legislators, we do want to thank you one more time for attending today. If you need more information on a business issue, please contact the staff at the chamber. But look around the room. I mean, you've got businesses as resources and stuff that you can end up utilizing, and we certainly welcome that. So please reach out. And to the chamber members that are in attendance here, I want to urge you to speak up during the legislative session. Take our phone calls when we have a need for your insight, and engage in this democratic process. You can sign up today to stay updated throughout the session in okcbusinessadvocate.com. Stay involved, stay aware, keep together, and we'll bring success and prosperity to Oklahoma. It is incumbent on all of us to stay involved, to be a part of this, because frankly, it is all about we the people. So with that, we're adjourned, and have a great day.